Hello, we're continuing with Derech Hashem, and we are learning this fourth section where we go through each of the mitzvos, many of the mitzvos, to explain the deeper reasoning behind them, why we do them, and the spiritual impact of them. So we've talked about Torah learning, we talked about saying Shema, and we're talking about davening. We're talking about now davening and all the mitzvahs that are associated with davening. So last time we learned the mitzvah of tzitzis. We learned about the meaning of tzitzis, what happens when we wear tzitzis, and how it is associated with davening. And now we're going to continue talking about tefillin. Okay, so in the Naaman edition, we're on page 592, which is Chelek Dalet Parak Vav Oz Zayin, section 4, chapter 6, number 7. So let's get right into it. Ach, Inyan ha-tefillin hu yoser gadol min ha-tzitzis harbe. The matter of tefillin is much greater than that of tzitzis. V'hu ki nasan habar yizbarach liyisrael, shu mamshichim alehem hemshech mamish mikdushaso yizbarach v'yis'atru bo. Hashem made that when a person wears tefillin, he draws down Hashem's holiness and he is crowned with it. Let's see more about that. Ba'ofen shekol b'chinaisehem hanafshios v'hagufios yechasu tachas ha'or hagadol hazeh v'yisuknu bo tikun gadol. That when this holiness is drawn down, a person's body and soul in every aspect finds shelter under the great heavenly light of Hashem, and rectifies and is greatly rectified through it. So when a person wears tefillin, the holiness of Hashem is drawn down upon him. He's crowned with it. We've seen many times this idea of being crowned with mitzvos in Derech Hashem, which has a lot of Kabbalistic implications we're not going to get into. But the holiness is drawn down on a person, and every aspect of a person, his body and soul, is under Hashem's spirituality, and it sanctifies him to a great level. V'hu ma'aseh amar kasav, and this is what the verse says, V'ro kol amei ha'aretz ki shem Hashem nikra alecha. It says by tefillin that all the peoples of the world will see the name of God is called upon you. V'tala inyan zeh b'mitzvah zu, and this idea of the name of Hashem being upon the Jewish people is specifically tied to the mitzvah of tefillin. V'chol hilchoseo prataseh, with all of its laws and all of its details. Right? The tefillin has many laws, just like every mitzvah. So they have to be square, they have to be black, they have to have written the parchment has to be written exactly correct. The straps have to be black, and many halachas have to do with tefillin. So each one of those halachas, each aspect, draws down. It has to be perfect for this holiness to draw down. It has to be done correctly. And he writes here, he quotes, Rabbi Naaman quotes from the Ramchal and Pirush HaMitzvos, that when we wear tefillin, Hashem rectifies the higher worlds and he weakens the forces of evil. And those elevated forces which are rectified are drawn down, and they adorn the heads of the Jewish people with crowns when they wear tefillin. Okay. V'amnam. Shnei evarim rashiim nimsaim ba'adam. There are two main body parts of a person. Let's call them two primary body parts, head body parts, lead body parts. Uvahem haneshama miskaberes tigbaris gadol, and associated with those specific body parts, the soul is extremely powerful and prevails greatly on those body parts. Vehem hamoach v'alev, and that is the brain and the heart. So the soul, even though it's a spiritual creation, has an association with the mind and the heart, with the brain and the heart. Hashem made, we're talking about how the tefillin draws down the holiness of Hashem. So first, the holiness of Hashem is drawn down through the head. And that's through the head tefillin. We put the tefillin, one of the tefillin go on the head. And it rectifies the brain and the neshama that is associated with the brain. And then it spreads to the heart, that the arm tefillin is right next to the heart. And after the holiness comes down through the brain, it spreads out and goes through the heart. And rectifies in it also. we find through this, since the tefillin is associated with these two main body parts that are associated with the soul, with the neshama, so then a person's entire being, his whole essence, becomes totally enveloped by the holiness of Hashem. He draws down the holiness of Hashem and he becomes crowned with it. And he becomes extremely sanctified. We find many details of the mitzvah. Just like every topic needs its different parts to complete the tikkun, to complete the rectification, according to the different aspects of man. Right? You can't just buy puzzle tefillin. You can have a person who's wearing tefillin his whole life, and they're not kosher, and he's not getting any of these benefits. All of these things only happen when a person has kosher tefillin. So he writes here that we see that the heart isn't just like some muscle that pumps blood through the body, but it's also part of the body that a person's soul relates to the world, right? That's the seat of emotion. And he writes also, Rabbi Naaman, that we see that the holiness is first drawn down through the brain, and then after that it goes to the heart. And he says that a person's intellect always has to rule over a person's emotions and desires. Okay, let's continue. Ches, v'hinei, nitztavinu lehisater be'iter zeh kol hayam, and we're commanded to wear tefillin all days, to have these crowns. Chutz b'mei HaKodesh, except for the holy days. Shehem atzmam os, because the holy days themselves are called an os, or a sign l'Yisrael, for the Jewish people. U'metzidam misater Yisrael be'itureihem b'li hishtad l'zacher. On the holy days, on Shabbos, Yantiv, we are already crowned. We already have these crowns, these spiritual crowns. So we don't need the tefillin. It's only on the regular weekday where we don't have the spiritual crowns that we have to wear tefillin. The only way we get the spiritual crowns during the week is through tefillin. On Shabbos and Yantiv, we have them independently. And even on those days, the weekdays where we wear tefillin, where we draw down these crowns of holiness, they don't equal the level of the holiness of the crowns that we get on Shabbos and Yantiv. They're much lower. And all of this was decreed and measured based on what is pleasing to Hashem. So we don't wear tefillin on Shabbos and Yantiv. We already have the crowns of holiness. Just because the day itself is holy, we don't have to do any external action to draw down that holiness. But on the weekdays, we don't have that, so we wear tefillin to draw down that holiness. Now, we talked about tefillin, we talked about tzitzis. So that once a person is wearing his talis, and he's wearing his tefillin, they instituted the order of davening according to what is needed, to make the rectifications, and the intent, to establish the entire world, all of the worlds, the spiritual worlds, in order that it should be fitting to get the shefa, the illumination from Hashem, and to draw down the shefa, the Hashem's illumination into the world. So we have here, we mentioned that when we daven, we have to, every day is a new day, it's a new creation. Every day has a different spiritual illumination than the day before. And no 2 days are the same. So if someone had a bad day, just think tomorrow is literally a new day, spiritually and physically. And the way we draw down that illumination is through davening. But also, before we daven, we put on the tzitzis, which we talked about what the tzitzis were last time, and the tefillin, which draw down the holiness of Hashem. And once we have the tzitzis and tefillin, we're ready to daven. And the prayers themselves were set in a way to draw down the necessary spiritual energy, which is required to uplift the world. And next time, God willing, we'll talk about the different parts of davening and what the spiritual implications are of each part of davening. Wishing everyone a beautiful day.